going to be talking about today is how State College, the city, got its churches. And last time we talked about how there were all these villages around, and there were lots of small churches. But as I suggest in this photograph, State College itself was pretty void at that point, and there was something floating across the darkness. State College was really not particularly there. This is a rail map from the 1890s. And the main point I'm trying to make here, I'm not trying to put any kind of test on the geography here, but that Penn State is sort of nowhere at the late 19th century. If you want to get there, you can go to a big town like Lamont, and then you get a carriage. But if you want to go to State College, then you have to go on real little side rail lines. You have to go to somewhere like Crumrine, which is a small place roughly where Joel Consulate Toyota is these days. And you find your way over to the State College. In the late 19th century, Penn State is not there. And until the late 1880s, State College does not have a church. The students have services on campus, but there is no church there. Now you have these flourishing little villages around. You have Ballsburg, you have Lamont, you have Center Furnace, but there's nothing in State College itself. And just to give you an idea of this, I'm just going to do a couple of real quick photos. The end of the 19th century, Penn State is a couple of buildings basically in fields. You have Old Main, which is all the classes as well as all the administration. And you'll see that you have this big building that is called the Armory, roughly where Willard Building is. And I'm going to be talking about that building. Let me just go, well, we'll get there. And I'll talk about that building because it's really important for where the churches come from. This is a population figure. Again, you don't need to know in detail. We all think of 1855 as the foundation of Penn State, but it is a very rinky-dink enterprise until the end of the century. At the end of the century, in 1900, it is about the same size as Milesburg, Millheim, places that we think of as very small. And the real explosion comes between 1900 and 1920, and that's when the churches are going to appear. By the way, the story of Penn State is you have Evan Pugh as president, and the place basically falls apart. And at the end of the century, you have this new high energy guy called George Atherton coming in, and he's the one who really expands it. And it starts looking like a university and gets quite big numbers. 1900, the population's under 900. I want to draw your attention to this one. This is the building called the Armory, which for many years was the real Penn State landmark, and that was only demolished in 1964. How they got away with demolishing it, Lord knows. But draw attention to that tower. That tower, I think, was imitated as the appropriate style for impressive architecture for the new churches by the Presbyterian Church and ultimately by St. Andrew's Episcopal, because they were trying to fit in with the distinctive, characteristic building of Penn State University. The loss of the Armory was a horrible thing. So if you think of Penn State University as being the heart of this very, very small community gathered around in State College, in 1900, there's very, very little there. I like this appropriately depressing photo of Pugh Street, which is at the end of the 19th century, and there's not much there. It's rooming houses, it's a couple of campus buildings, there's not much. Then between about 1900 and 1920, it booms. And that is the point at which State College starts coming to resemble prosperous towns that we know in the region, like Bellefonte, like Huntingdon, like Lockhaven. I put a slide up here, which is way too text heavy, and don't worry about it. But the point I'm trying to make is the chronology. 1888 is when the first churches appear in State College. And here's an interesting fact about them. They all appear as offshoot settlements from the villages around. The villagers charitably decide they'd better send something in to help out this heathen settlement around the university. So it's kind of the opposite picture from what you get from the flourishing towns of the day, like, as I say, Belfont or Huntingdon, where you have these old established churches going back to the early 19th century. It's not until round about 1900, 1910, that you get a real explosion of churches in State College proper. And incidentally, the Episcopal Church is right in the middle of this story. So how does all this happen? 1888, Penn State is starting to flourish. And at the same time, some of the older villages around are flailing. Their economy is causing some kind of issue. And the first people who move in are the Methodists and the Presbyterians. And I'll just talk about the Presbyterians immediately. They have a big foothold down basically in the Lamont area. They have the Spring Creek Church. They've lost their building due to a fire. By the way, very common pattern. Many of these older churches are wood. They burn easily, and when they burn, they have to decide whether to reconstruct on site or whether to move to a more prosperous settlement. The Presbyterians in 1887, 1888 build a new church, and there it is. And it is exactly, it's on College Ave and McAllister. It's where Faith United is right now. There's a story there that I will talk about. So the Presbyterians come into town, and it's interesting that they build on that part of College Avenue, and it gives you an idea. At that point, it's not College Avenue, it is the Lamont Pike, because what is going to become State College is, and I hate to say this, it's a suburb of Lamont. It is a very small kind of community. So the Presbyterians build their church, they flourish, and after a few years, they make a very important move. They sell that premises, they sell that church to the German Reformed, and they move in 1913 to a really bold building, which in some ways is the nucleus of the later downtown churches, and it's one we know very well. It's the Presbyterian Church on Beaver and Fraser. Those are our near neighbors. But I just invite you to think about that in the context of the time. You have a place that is a glorified village. It's a very, very small place. As you know, the first photos of downtown State College have got the pigs romping in the middle of what becomes College Avenue. It's a very small, rinky-dink place. And they build this absolutely heroic structure, which is the tower. And like I say, I think the reason they build that particular tower, it's meant to be an echo of the Armory. The Armory's got that grand and very famous tower, which has become iconic. And the Presbyterians are saying, well, hey, there's going to be a church here, and we can build something that is as impressive as as what the university has. And so for a few years, that tower becomes the great church landmark downtown. And it sets up a pattern. If you go to older Pennsylvania towns or towns in many states, you'll find that there is a block or a few blocks of very upscale buildings from the 19th, early 20th century. And that's where you find all the great mainline denominations, the Presbyterians, the Lutheran, the Episcopal. Up until 1913, State College is really not there. And so it doesn't have any grand set of church blocks like I'm describing. As I'll describe, the Presbyterians carve out that new territory from which all the other denominations will build. You know, there's something nice in the archives of St. Andrews. There's a poster, a fundraising poster from the 1920s, and it's a really interesting thing. And it shows a picture of the Presbyterian Church, and basically says, "Look, the Presbyterians can do this. Why can't the Episcopalians? Why can't we? You know, please send money." So, like I say, the Presbyterians do this very bold building. You can tell it's a very recent photo because there's a gentleman with a mask. But I come back to this period round about, call it 1905 to 1915, the decade or so before the First World War, when State College goes from being a village to a substantial town, and it's on the route to becoming what it would be, which is really the heart of Centre County. And it's in that decade that you get the same story in virtually every one of the churches. You get a few people gathered around, you get a few services, and they say, how are we going to build a real set of churches? And altogether now, the Presbyterians can do it, we can do it. So there's a lot of sense of imitation there. I come back to this figure, and so the Presbyterians, as I say, in 1913, they built their church on Beaver, but so do at that point lots of other people move in. The Lutherans, for instance, are very interesting. They're settled out at Pine Hall, which these days is, we know because they've got those two churches opposite each other on Route 26. At that time, that is a really flourishing village. And they see what the Presbyterians have done and think, we should move into this new settlement of State College. It's an interesting example of how denominations respond to economic change, community change, the appearance of new communities. They set up a downtown church. Initially, it's where Panera is right now. Very shortly moves out to where are we? Beaver and Atherton. And the other great part of the story is where the area where the Presbyterians had left on College Ave. That Presbyterian church is knocked down. That becomes the German Reformed Church, and that eventually becomes Faith United. This particular building is what's there now, and again, that's kind of an interesting story. That church dates from 1931-32. And when you look at it, you have to think, that's right in the middle of the Depression. And the fact that State College is such a building site for churches in this era is really kind of remarkable. There's a lot of determination. Clearly, there's a lot of money going into these. And I find it interesting that all the different churches, whatever their tradition, whether it's, Reformed or very puritanical, they all go for these very ecclesiastical, churchy looking buildings, as if they've come from the background to a very British masterpiece theatre. And every church does something like this. So, the Reformed built this building in the 30s, which is a very late medieval English style church. Here's the other interesting success story. The other great denomination around here is the Methodists. The Methodists are in a flourishing town called Centre Furnace. And you drive by Center Furnace, you have Center Furnace Mansion, you have the Iron Stack. And I say this again, sorry to be monotonous, that is a booming place when State College is really not there at all. In the 1880s, Center Furnace is suffering an economic crisis because it is losing its iron industry. The Methodist congregation there doesn't know what to do, and they have a debate. And it's interesting in retrospect, and the congregation is split down the middle. Half the people say, well, let's move into State College because it's going to be something. And the others say, no, it doesn't even have any kind of big rail station. Let's move to the place that's really going to be the boom community of the next century, which is Lamont. And so they have to debate State College, Lamont, Lamont State College. And they basically split. And half the congregation goes off and builds a new church in Lamont, which becomes Mount Nittany United Methodist, and that's still there today in new premises. And the others move to this site that I'm showing right now, which is St. Paul's United Methodist. It's right next to that faith church. And of course, that is one of the big premises that is there today. It's one of the really major State College churches. And of course, it's on College Avenue. It's right opposite the campus. And one interesting thing, these churches are very much intended to service the university. They're meant to service students. Over time, the Methodists prosper. They build this very grand building. By the way, one thing you notice in photographs of older buildings, they really are very happy having ivy and creeper going up the walls in a way that we would not do today because of what it would do to structures. And that, with the Presbyterians, is probably the dominant church building in State College through much of the 20th century. I'll just show one really classic photo. One of the worst things that happened to State College churches came in 1987, when there was a horrible fire at St. Paul's Methodist. Really devastating. State College does not have that many old buildings it can afford to lose. Very, very fortunately, they were able to do a fine reconstruction job on that church, but that was one of the more traumatic moments in the history of the local churches. Okay, so by the end of the 19th century, you've got some churches, but the real boom then follows round about the First World War and into the 20s. And I ask you to walk with me right now as we walk up Fraser Street and Barrow Street. So we start with the Presbyterian Church. We go past the post office. On the right, we'll see St. Andrew's, which I'll come back to in a moment. Oh, and we also see one other building, which is absolutely central at the time. It's not a church exactly, but it's so central, which is the Masonic Temple, which appears in 1941. You can guarantee that so much of the church life at this time has a near total overlap with the Masonic Lodge, the Masonic Temple. All the local Protestant clergy are members of that Masonic Lodge. You go past St. Andrew's, you come to Fairmount, and at Fairmount and Fraser, you have the original site of Our Lady of Victory Church. Again, opens in 1917, very much part of that First World War boom. And they continue there until they get overwhelmed by numbers in the 1960s, and then they move out to their nice new site with the fine modern architecture, and very important, lots more parking space. Never forget the basic rule: a church can never grow larger than its car park. You turn over to Barrow Street. What you have there, you find the American Baptist Church, now University Baptist and Brethren. And if you look at the date on that, it's 1926. So again, State College in the 19-teens, 1920s is in the middle of a great building boom. There's a competition among the denominations, among the churches, to build the most impressive the finest church. And then you walk down Burroughs Street a little bit, and you come to what is called, at that point, Albright Bethune. We call it today. At the time, it's St. John's Evangelical, and as you see the date there, the original date is 1921, all part of this this 20s building boom. This is when the churches were expanding. So State College in this era, relatively recently, it's just about the within the lifetime of some very older folks. State College becomes a town, a city, with that characteristic range of denominations clustered around that couple of major blocks. And as to what the denominations are, I find this kind of interesting. This is from a 1946 survey, and you don't have to take the figures very precisely, but I think this is kind of interesting. This is church members. Far and away at the top are two. Presbyterians with over 1,000 members. And I think that's members, that's not attenders, that's members, absolutely flourishing. Presbyterians and Methodists between them really dominate the town. And as you see, Grace Lutheran with about 600. But look what happens after that. Our Lady of Victory, this is still before the bulk of the veterans have returned after World War II. It's before the GI Bill really hits. And at this point, Catholics are there, but they're not that yet a really big force, but they're starting. You see, there are 750 Catholic students. And look at this. St. Andrew's is there with 325 members from the town, more than Our Lady of Victory, which is interesting, more than the Catholics. But look at that, 240 students. And one thing we know at this point is that St. Andrew's is firmly committed to being the university church, the university chaplaincy, as much as it is the parish church of the town. University Baptist, very much the same. These are the big guys. Mainly Protestant, growing Catholic presence. There's also a Jewish congregation with several hundred students, not such a large town membership. I'll talk about that next time. And as I say, who is not there? Well, notice some of the famous denominations. You have a couple of Quakers, Mennonites, and so on, but they mainly attend like smaller churches or communities out in the villages. Well, I'm not trying to suggest that we've done all this stuff and now we can come to the point of the story, which is the Episcopal Church, but there is a nice example there. It precisely fits the story that I'm telling. In the 19th century, the Episcopal Church basically is not here. It's not a big Pennsylvania denomination up until the late or end of the 19th century, at least not outside Philadelphia. There are a few settlements. In the mid-19th century, they develop in some of the mid-sized towns, Huntingdon, Lock Haven, Bellefonte, Altoona. The first example I find of Episcopalians worshiping in State College, probably the 1890s. There are some services. In the middle of the century, there's one very interesting guy who really deserves a biography. The rector of St. John's Bellefonte is a man called George Washington Nat, who is absolutely heroic character, who's extremely ill, he's extremely sickly, but he spends his life riding a horse and going on a carriage and going to all the little towns, little settlements around. If you're an Episcopalian, he will find you, he will have a worship service for you. Turn of the century, the Episcopalians start becoming more numerous. 1908, they officially established the a community, roughly at Fraser and Foster. And in the early part of the century, they experienced, like everyone else, what you might call Presbyterian envy. and they feel the need to build a church. I think in choosing this particular style, which is a 13th century English tower style, they're partly influenced by the Presbyterians. They're also partly influenced by the armory on campus. But they're also very driven by need to respond to a flourishing congregation. And we have stories at the time which make interesting reading in retrospect, which is they're trying to hold Episcopal services in houses and halls. And you have dozens of college students, Episcopal college students, who are sitting on the floor, who are trying to squeeze into the building. And finally, they get this really handsome building going in 1928 is the official opening date. And I know Kathy Dorler knows more than anyone about how the building develops thereafter. And from the 1950s onwards, it starts getting these spectacular stained glass, and they build the extended building. But what I want you to do is to think of it in the context of such a new town, a new expansion. And it really works, it really pays off. I go back to those 1946 figures, which provide a basis for the period between 1946 and about 1966, which mark a remarkable expansion of all those denominations and all the other newer congregations that I'll be talking about next time. And by the time you get into the 1950s and 1960s, all these churches are having screaming problems, not of decline, but of growth. These are young family congregations. And certainly that would include St. Andrews. So what are the main kind of lessons you learn from this? Well, again, I come back to this issue of ethnicity. Although as we get into the mid-20th century, a lot of the older ethnic divisions and linguistic divisions are fading. In other words, the German Reformed, pretty much everyone is speaking English regularly. You're not getting the major cultural divisions between denominations. And I'm going to make a suggestion, which I can't prove, but I throw out there for your consideration. I've said that all these different churches aim for a general medieval style. Some aim for the 13th century, some aim for the 14th century. And often in doing this, they will make their interiors very kind of generic and I would say very high church. So they have no concern about stained glass. They have no concerns about putting a cross on the altar. Now, in the Episcopal Church, that is no big deal. But Presbyterians and Reformed and Methodists start showing crosses and stained glass in a way that in earlier centuries would have been absolutely shocking. It'd be way too high church and way too Catholic. So they moved to what I might call, and I'm sorry if this sounds trivializing, almost like a generic churchiness and church quality. So, long story short, in 1890, if you walk through State College, first of all the streets would be mud, there would be pigs on it, and there would be a couple of brand new churches indicating the village was turning into something else. By 1950, it has turned into a major, rapidly expanding small city with the appropriate churches. And I began with a general picture of the community, and I end with something which has no more excuse other than the fact I think it's a nice picture and a nice view of Mount Nittany. And I will end there. It's not meant to signify dark times or anything, but I like it.